about at a later point. But akarma is kind of karma that A, does not generate any further reaction, and 2, it negates all the previous reactions that are accumulated. We also discussed, if you remember, a sort of like a karma cycle, which is the subtle effect of karma. So one is more sort of like the gross effect that we can see, like somebody does something bad, they get a reaction. So somebody smokes, maybe they get some health challenges. But
instant and delayed, yeah.
Instant, yeah. So we talked about instant and delayed, but there's also a subtle kind of a reaction that gets deposited within the heart as a channel, right? As a propensity, as an inclination to perform that activity again. And that is the reason why many times people find it hard to break out of a past habit, because those habits have sort of formed a channel within the mind. And so the whole process of mantra meditation, which is actually an activity of akarma, helps to create those path channels within the consciousness, so that we can give up those activities that we are addicted to. And then from there, we showed you a video of the snakes and ladder, if you remember. And there was a lady who talked about how she felt that there was no, this whole idea of karma basically meant that we were just like a puppet or a pawn. And that if you want to just maybe quickly show her comment, because we're kind of going to jump off of her comment now. Yeah, right there.
It really is just down to the dice. It's in part religious, I think, this idea that your destiny is controlled by the stars, that you are really just a pawn in this bigger game that is life. It really is a common feeling amongst Indians.
So this is actually a very common conception that many people might have, that the law of karma is deterministic, and that it means that one really has no control. It's, so we'll talk more about this, free will and destiny and divinity. How do they come together? Are we truly free, or is everything being guided by destiny?
So this is a topic that is scattered through Bhagavad-Gita. What we have done here is kind of brought all the different points together, so it kind of makes a coherent sense. And we'll start off with this very interesting story. James Oliver Huberty, in 1984 in San Isidro, he lost his job and he was really frustrated. And that particular day on July 19th, 1984, he just walked into a McDonald's with his 3 different guns, and he shot down 21 people in great rage. And then later on, he was also shot by some of the police officers. And this generated quite a bit of debate in the world about whether he was really responsible because he kind of lost his mind, whether he's just a puppet in the hands of his destiny, or was he actually responsible for this attack. So this led to many interesting questions, and similar questions we come across in our own minds when we are dealing with life, and sometimes the unfairness of it in many ways. So are we simply puppets, helplessly manipulated our past activities? That's what the karma cycle seems to indicate, that karma means there is a reaction, and whatever you've done in the past, you'll get the reactions in this life or the next life. So it's kind of all, your life is kind of already set in that sense.
And so then the question comes up, do we really even have any freedom to act, right? If everything is predestined, then what's my role? And sometimes people actually just take this discussion to the next level. And they say, if it's all in the stars, if it's already destined, then why should I even do any work?
Yeah.
Right? If I'm destined to, there are a lot of questions. Like sometimes people will say, oh, all right, so I'm supposed to live for 60 years. What if I go off to the edge of a cliff and I jump off, right? Then what? Is my life, what does it mean then? So there's a lot of conflict between...
because the same question can be applied to James Oliver Huberty, that if he was destined to kill these people, then was he really responsible? And then what is the meaning of punishment? What is the meaning of remorse if everything is predestined?
And yet we do find that we also, so that's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument could be, well, I'm totally free to choose. And so, especially in today's times, we have this very strong sense that, oh, I'm a free person. I make decisions based on my own freedom to choose. So then the question comes up, are we completely free? So, sort of like wanting to bring this conflict between how free are we and how controlled are we, right? So many times, when we talk to people, some people might be on one end of the spectrum and might say, I'm totally free, right?
I can decide completely. Sometimes some people might say, well, I'm not responsible, God did it. And whenever God wants me to do something, like sometimes people will say, if God wants me to do something good, then my time will come and I'll do something good. Or take up spiritual life, sometimes people say. If God doesn't want me to do it, then my time will never come. So kind of putting all the onus on God.
And then there are circumstances. So sometimes people will look at their life situation, maybe their childhood or their parents or, the friend or this or that. And they'll say, what could I do? I was just provoked, or my life situation was such that I didn't really have a choice but to be this way.
Yeah, I grew up in a foster homes or abused and so on and so forth. And that's why this is who I am.
And then, of course, the whole big discussion on karma, right? Where it may seem that it's all in the charts, and especially, sometimes people who follow astrology, sometimes they're accused of being fatalistic, and it's, said, oh, they just want to believe, that something is already being determined for them.
Yeah, and this is a big one of the 6 philosophies, it's called karma mimamsha, which means whatever activities you do, you'll get the results, and nobody can basically change that. So your karma is basically deterministic. And my genes is another one that this is what I've inherited, and your genes basically determine what kind of person you will be, what kind of emotions you have, what kind of actions you will take. So you don't have any control of
that. And more as we are discovering the world of genes, there are studies that sometimes they'll say, well, this person is predisposed to be an alcoholic or and those kind of things. And then it kind of seems like, well, I'm helpless, And then some people just think everything is just happening by random chance, and it really doesn't matter.
It's all just a movement of atoms and molecules, and that's another philosophy. It's called the Vaisheshika philosophy, in which everything is driven by atoms and molecules. So that's what kind of philosophy that is prevalent now, more prevalent nowadays, that everything is determined by the random behavior of nature.
Just give me 1 second. Yeah, it's a misunderstanding of astrology too. Absolutely, it is. So let's look at what are some of the. This is an experiment. It's called the Libet experiment, and where. Do you remember where? It's quite interesting how.
Put your hand in front of you and flex your wrist. You presumably first had a thought. Flex my wrist. That then caused your wrist to move. That's how it seems. But Benjamin Libet's experiments in the 1980s have cast some doubt on that. In his neuroscience lab, he wired up subjects to an EEG machine measuring brain activity via electrodes on their scalps, and then asked them to choose to perform a simple hand movement when they felt like it. He also got them to record the time at which they made a conscious decision to move their hands. Disconcertingly, he found evidence of brain activity initiating the movement hundreds of milliseconds before the conscious decision was reported. In other words, his experiments seemed to show that the conscious decision didn't cause the movement. The brain activity bringing about movement started before the individual willed anything to happen. Some people think this is proof that free will is an illusion, that our conscious decisions are more like reports on what is already happening than the causes of our action. Libet didn't go that far. He thought that we might not have free will, but there's still time for what some have called free won't, a conscious veto of an action that is started in the brain. Others are more skeptical about the implications of these.
So this is like one end of the spectrum where you see that free will is just a consequence of some activity in the brain.
And there are, many neuroscientists who sometimes do say that
Right.
it's all determined. And so now we will, watch Michio Kaku talking about on the other end of the spectrum, where he says that how physics has ended the free will debate.
Newtonian determinism says that the universe is a clock, a gigantic clock that's wound up at the beginning of time, and it's been ticking ever since according to Newton's laws of motion. So, what you're going to eat 10 years from now, on January 1st, has already been fixed. It's already known using Newton's laws of motion.
So I just wanted to add a point there that Newton discovered 3 laws of motion, and one of his laws was that if you know the position of a particle and its velocity at any point, then you can determine where the particle will be and what it will. And the third thing is the force on the particle. So if you know these 3 things, the initial position, velocity, and the force on the particle, then you can determine where the particle will be and what it will be doing in the future. So he said, since the universe is made of all these particles, then you can just take it at any point in the future and then find out what the future will be.
Einstein believed in that. Einstein was a determinist. Does that mean that a murderer, a horrible mass murderer, isn't really guilty of his works because it was already preordained billions of years ago? And Einstein said, well, yeah, in some sense that's true. Even mass murderers were predetermined. But he said they should still be placed in jail. Heisenberg then comes along and proposes the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and says, nonsense. There's uncertainty. You don't know where the electron is. It could be here, here, or many places simultaneously. This, of course, Einstein hated because he said God doesn't play dice with the universe. Well, hey, get used to it. Einstein was wrong. God does play dice. Every time we look at an electron, it moves. There's uncertainty with regards to the position of the electron. So what does that mean for free will? It means in some sense we do have some kind of free will. No one can determine your future events given your past history. There's always the wild card. There's always the possibility of uncertainty in whatever we do. So when I look at myself in a mirror, I say to myself, what I'm looking at is not really me. It looks like me, but it's not really me at all. It's not me today, now. It's me a billionth of a second ago, because it takes a billionth of a second for life to...
Sorry, yeah. So I think it just continues on, but you get the idea that just give us a minute. I think somebody wants to be sent to the breakout room. So
The breakout rooms. Radhika. How did she come out?
oh, Hindi Radhika. Okay.
And who else?
That's it, I think, right?
Is there anybody else?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, even in science, they're kind of now accepting this idea about free will because there is an uncertainty, and that leaves a room for a particle to behave in this way or that way depending on who is observing it and when they are observing it.
You go from me to the mirror.
Go ahead.
So this is another aspect of Dennett. He discovers that how people actually have free will, and it has an impact on their decisions.
I think this is a thought experiment
Yeah.
that he talks about. So let's watch it and then we'll discuss it. I think it's exactly what what comes out when you don't believe that there is any freedom, right?
Let me trot out one of my recent favorites, which I devised to jangle the nerves of neuroscientists who've been going around saying that neuroscience shows that we don't have free will. I think their reasons for saying that are ill-considered, and moreover that what they're doing is apt to be mischievous and doing some real harm. So I concocted a little thought experiment, a little intuition pump, to suggest that. So this is the case of the nefarious neurosurgeon who treats a patient who has obsessive compulsive disorder by inserting a little microchip in his brain, which controls the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, there is such a chip. It's been developed in the Netherlands, and it works really quite well. That's science fact, but now here comes science fiction. So the neurosurgeon, after she's operated on the guy, sewed him all up. So, okay, your OCD is under control now, you'll be happy to learn. But moreover, our team here will be monitoring you 24/7, and we're going to be controlling everything you do from now on. You'll think you have free will, you'll think you're making your own decisions, but really you won't have free will at all. Free will is an illusion that we will maintain while controlling you. Goodbye, have a nice life. Sends him out the door. Well, he believes her. She had a shiny lab and, lots of degrees and diplomas and all that. So what does he do? Well, thinking he doesn't have free will anymore, he gets a little self-indulgent, a little bit aggressive, a little negligent in how he decides what to do. And pretty soon, by indulging some of his worst features, he's got himself in trouble with the law. And he's arrested, and he's put on trial. And at the trial, he says, "But Your Honor, I don't have free will. I'm under the control of the team at the neurosurgery clinic." I say, "What's this?" And they call the neurosurgeon to the stand. They said, "Did you tell this man that you were controlling his every move, he didn't have free will?" She says, "Yeah, I did, yeah. But I was just messing with his head. That was just a joke. I didn't think he'd believe me." Now right there, I think we can stop, take a deep breath and say, well, she did something really bad. She really harmed that man. In fact, her little joke telling him that actually accomplished non-surgically pretty much what she claimed to accomplish surgically. She disabled him. By telling him he didn't have free will, she pretty much turned his free will off and turned him into a morally incompetent person. Now, if we agree that she did a bad thing, if nobody recommends people play jokes like this, what are we to say about the neuroscientists who are telling the public every day, "We've shown in our neuroscience labs that nobody has free will"? I think if the neuroscientists recognize that what my imaginary neurosurgeon did was irresponsible, they should think seriously about whether it's irresponsible of them to make these claims about free will. And it's not just a fantasy. Vos and Schooler, in an important paper which has been replicated.
Okay, so it goes on. So again, once you take free will out, then it just becomes whatever we are doing is not within our hand. It's very, very disempowering. And who's responsible?
And what is the meaning of morality if there is no free will? What is right and what is wrong?
Yeah. And yet, as we all know, that there are forces acting upon us. So we'll explore that. This is a concept that has been discussed in great detail in our ancient texts. I think we can come back to this in the end because, let's come back to. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, we'll come back to this in the end. Can you move on? So this is actually a movie called The Adjustment Bureau, which actually the whole movie is about this guy who's there is this whole bureau that controls people and they have a preset script that they're supposed to follow. No, we'll come back. I think there'll be more.
So there is a great discussion that happens between this great king Satyavrata, and he asks the fish incarnation Matsya avatar during this great voyage that lasts for a whole night of Brahma. He asked this question that what is superior, fate or one's own effort and endeavors, because it's confusing. If fate is determining our actions, then what is the meaning of our endeavors? And if there is no fate, then are we free to do anything?
Actually, just to back off a little bit, who is King Satyavrata and who's Matsya?
Okay.
So in the beginning of time, just like you have the story of Noah's Ark, in the Bhagavad school also, there is a king, King Satyavrata, who actually meets a fish. And the fish is very small, but then he takes it home, and then the fish keeps growing. But anyways, when the fish becomes really big, then he tells him that actually there's a great flood that's going to come, and he instructs King Satyavrata to actually make a big boat and to put like one one pair of each species on that boat, and say that when the waters of devastation come, then I will appear as the Matsya avatar or the fish incarnation, and I'll pull the boat, and then this way they will be saved, and then we start all over again. So this is actually the context. And so this king Satyavrata, he inquires from Matsya, the fish incarnation, about this very important topic, which is what is superior, fate or one's own effort. And we have people on both sides, like we have said. Some people really believe that if I work hard enough, I can make it work, right? So he gives a really nice analogy, Matsya Avatar. He says, he compares it to three things. He says that there is effort, and then there is fate or destiny, and then there is time. So he says that, for example, if there's a farmer and he takes a seed and he plants the seed in the soil, so that is our effort.
And then, well, the question then is that sufficient for the crops to happen? So then the next thing that the plant is dependent on, the farmer is dependent on, is the rain. And if there is no rain, then the plant will not grow. So that is considered fate. And the interplay is that the third thing is also needed. So say there is a planting and then there's rain, and the third thing that is needed is time. And if without sufficient time, there won't be any crops. And time is what actually fructifies the plant. So if somebody plants, so the question is, if I don't put any effort, will the fate still give me what I'm supposed to get? So here in this example, if I didn't even plant the seeds, then there could be rain, which is fate, but nothing will grow.
And the converse is also true, that if I plant, but if my fate is not working for me, then I may plant, but I may not get the result.
Right.
So there is an interplay between my effort, my fate, and we'll break down this fate part just in a little bit, so hold on to that. But at least one thing is clear, that our effort is required. And so, when people argue against that if it's in my fate, it will happen. But as we can see, the fate alone cannot do anything. We also need our own effort.
Which is our free will, basically.
Which is our free will. And even if you have both these things, there's still a time element, that it may take time for all of this to come together.
So it's not sufficient. Either the free will nor the fate. Both of them are not sufficient. You also need another factor, which is time, which is beyond the fate and our free will. So this is one explanation of this interplay, but we'll go to the next a more complete explanation of fate and free will. What is free will? So the free will is like the space between stimulus and our response.
So Prabhupada actually uses this example to show that how a person actually gets on a plane, right? And so he's bought a ticket, say from here to California. So that is, once he gets on the plane, he is on the plane. But then once he gets on the plane, he still has more decisions that he's going to be making. For example, he's going to be choosing, how am I going to behave with my co-passengers? How am I going to be with the stewardess? Am I going to create a commotion, so on and so forth. What kind of food am I going to eat? There are so many choices that he's going to make as he's on the plane. So in one sense, you could say that he is on a plane to get to some place, and that perhaps he will not be able to change, at least not right away, but at least he's making more choices, which will then determine his future course of.
So in this case, his destiny or fate can be compared to him boarding the plane, and once he is at a certain point in his life, then what he will get is also dependent on not just his fate, but the actions he takes at that point. So that's his free will.
So Viktor Frankl, actually, who was a person who spent a lot of time in a very horrific situation at the Nazi concentration camp, he talks about this idea about the space between a stimulus and a response, and how that space is actually our freedom to choose. And so we'll talk more about that freedom and how that freedom can be sometimes greater or less, but we always have that freedom. And the reason why we have that freedom is because we are minute sparks of Krishna.
So one of the qualities of Krishna, that he has all the opulences, the wealth, beauty, knowledge, and so on and so forth. One of the other qualities of Krishna, that he has infinite independence. The first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam describes that he is Swarat. Janmadesya yada anvayad itaratas abhigya Swarat. That's like the definition of absolute truth. Swarat means infinite free will. He can do whatever he wants, and he has energies that will make it happen.
And so because we are tiny part, because sometimes we've heard people in the course of our teaching, people complaining that why did he give us a free will? So technically we have not been given a free will. We are, because we are part of that supremely independent supreme consciousness, so we actually by our very dharma, our constitution, we are free, but we are minutely free,
just like the spark of a fire. The spark of the fire has the qualities of the fire, right? There's a little bit of light and a little bit of heat, so it doesn't have to do anything. The spark has those qualities, right? So similarly, being part of Krishna, Krishna says in this 15th chapter, Mamev Amsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, that every living entity is my Amsha. And because of that, the living entity also has this free will. This cannot be taken away. It's part of who the soul is. And then it's a very definitive quality of the soul to have free will.
And also, it's what actually gives us the ability to love, to surrender. All that has no meaning without this free will. Because otherwise we would just be like robots, And the other thing is, I forget now what I was going to say, but yeah. So this free will is something, I was going to say that how this free will is so sacred and it is so precious that even Krishna does not interfere with this. Like sometimes people say, is there something that God cannot do? So if there is one thing that Krishna cannot do, or will not do rather, is that he will not interfere in this minute free will.
And that's why he kind of, because sometimes people say, why doesn't God take everybody back to the spiritual world? And why is there suffering in this world? Why is there evil?
Why did he send me here in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, he could have just made it, or why doesn't he make this material world like as good as the spiritual realm? So it all boils down to our free will, and because of that, Krishna allows us to exercise our free will and come to that conclusion ourselves where we want to be.
Oops, sorry about that.
So it's like Krishna is an ocean, and we are like a drop of the ocean. We have the same qualities as Krishna, but in very minute quantity.
So we are qualitatively one, but quantitatively different. In fact, Prabhupada in many places, he even says that we are like sample gods. So like, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but perhaps those that are from India probably has seen it. That you go to like a flour mill or like
a rice mill.
My
grandfather used to have a rice mill. And
so you have these big bags, right? And then you take the scoop, and you scoop it inside that bag, and then you take out a little bit of rice.
I used to really enjoy doing that, putting that scoop in the bag.
And then by studying the nature of that little scoop, you know what the big bag is like. So in the same way, we are also like tiny samples. So by studying, and that's the reason why we can actually understand supreme consciousness, because we can if we can try and understand that individual consciousness, that helps us understand the supreme consciousness. So I don't know if you're moving too fast. If you guys have any questions, should we pause here?
Maybe pause here and then come to the slide. So let me stop share.
Oh yes, Delia, Achintya Veda Veda, yes. This is an amazing formula. Which formula were you talking about, Sid?
The fate, effort and time one.
Yes. Yes. To Dedre is saying, is it not important to also address the faith belief factor to not fall into being passive, tenacity to overcome challenges? Faith belief factor to not fall into being,
Yeah, I mean, if you mean that by faith or belief they become passive or we become inactive, it's quite the opposite actually.
And that was actually Arjuna's big dilemma, right? That he also felt like, okay, if I have to be spiritual, then I should just walk away from this whole thing. I have nothing to do with this world. So there is actually sometimes an aphorism that's used. It says, Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya. So it's all false, so let me just walk away from it all, right? So that would be, you know, the faith getting in the way and we becoming very passive.
Yeah.
But that's not the purpose of spiritual life, is not to make us passive, but to really help us engage with the world in a way that's beneficial for everyone.
The next two questions are also very important with
Because then we can continue the rest tomorrow actually.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, because it's already 8:23.
What is the difference between fate and mercy? Very, very good question. That will be answered in our next slide. And also related question is with our tiny free will, can we change the fate? Very, very good question too. Again, that's we'll explain that in the next slide.
But in short, yes, that is the whole idea, that man is the architect of his own destiny. And Krishna has given us that freedom to choose and to decide. So at every moment, we are actually creating our own destiny. And that way we can be completely responsible. Anything and everything that we are experiencing is a direct result of our past choices.
I think we should finish the last slide.
Oh, we should? Okay.
Yeah, because then,
All right, so Lokataisha thinks we should continue, so we will. I was just buying time.
but then we only have one slide for tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, this is it. Okay.
So this is a little bit more detailed explanation that is presented in the Bhagavad-Gita and our Vedic scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam. There's several factors that actually affect how we act and what the results of those actions will be. So there are two factors here. So our actions and the results of those actions. So the first factor is our destiny, or the results of our previous karma, right, that we have done in the past till this point. And one of the things that results in is our physical body, which is called prarabdha. Prarabdha, as we discussed in the last class, prarabdha is the manifestation of the karmic reactions in an observable way. So the fact that we have a certain kind of body, right, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, the fact that we are born in a certain situation with a silver spoon in mouth or no spoon at all, what kind of circumstances we grow up in, what kind of
Parents we have,
what kind of parents we have, friends, siblings, whatever, that's all prarabdha karma. That's physical body. What kind of genes we get, like that's also prarabdha karma. What kind of upbringing we'll get, basically. And
then we have two more things. One is the mental body. So there's a psychophysical nature that we are all born with, right? So our psychological tendencies, and if you remember that graph that we looked at, we are all born with certain mental tendencies coming from so many previous lifetimes. And so that is also, in some ways, you could say, is sort of deterministic. Not completely, but to some extent. You could say that it might determine the kind of person I am and what kind of things I like or I don't like.
So there's a typo here.
There's a typo here.
What was the third point?
So third thing was physical, the external things that happen to us. So the happiness and the suffering that comes to us, right? So we also talked about that every action that we have performed in the past creates a kind of a reaction. And that's kind of what, sometimes astrology might be able to detect, that, oh, it's going to rain, or it's going to, you may be destined for this, whatever,
Some kind of bounty or some kind of suffering or some kind of accident or lawsuit or this and that. So there's a certain amount of happiness and suffering that is coming your way, and no matter how you try to wiggle out of it, right, it will appear in some other way. Just like that appointment with Samara, right? Appointment in Samara with death. So if you try to escape it here, then it will come in some other form. So that is something that you can't really control that much.
So now, because of this certain kind of propensity, we engage in some, and we'll talk more about this 3 gunas or these 3 modes in a later section. Krishna spends a lot of time talking about these 3 modes, but suffice it is to say that we engage with this world and there are different modes or different gunas there. And so based on that, there's a feedback loop, right? So we actually get influenced by the particular mode that we engage in. As an example, I have a certain psychophysical nature. Now, I still have a choice. I might still choose to say, well, I'm just going to go and hang out in the bar, right? So now, once I start doing that, then that environment is in turn going to start affect my consciousness.
And how we talked about that whatever action we perform, it also produces a subtle reaction, right, which is a predisposition or a tendency to do that thing again. So all these three gunas, goodness, passion and ignorance, they have a feedback loop in our consciousness, and then they deposit something back whenever we engage with. So if somebody continuously engages with mode of ignorance, they'll keep going down deeper and deeper into mode of ignorance. And these three gunas in Sanskrit also means rope. So you can see that how this calf is tied to a pole with a rope. And what's his freedom? His freedom is the length of the rope, and that's the length of that's another way to look at free will. Our free will is there, but it is tiny. It's equal to the length of the rope.
And depending on what kind of choices we make, this rope can be bigger or this rope can be shorter. So for people who engage exclusively in the mode of ignorance, which means that they they have developed addictions and different kinds of reckless behavior, as we can imagine, their rope is very short. And that's why we see them almost helpless in the face of their addictions. And they go to the rehab, come back out, and they feel like they cannot get out of this loop. To the extent that a person is in the mode of goodness, this rope is that much bigger. And so our free will can be manifest that much more. Also in different species, like in the plant body, our free will is much more restrictive. In an animal body, it's simply acting out of an instinct. So again, the freedom to choose is very, very limited.
Yeah, and in human body we have more free will, but if we go down, then our free will just disappears, pretty much disappears.
It's kind of like, if you think of a prison, right? And you see that sometimes prisoners, who are behaving well, they're given an opportunity to actually work in the prison as a librarian or take courses, and they
do tax returns.
And then sometimes if they really misbehave, then they're put in a solitary confinement. And then
sometimes for even weeks and months.
And at that time their freedom is completely taken away. And they just so like that. So in the same way, our existence in this world, depending on our choices and our actions, our freedom can expand or our freedom can decrease. And Prabhupada says in one of his purport that we actually desire complete freedom. That is the need of the spirit soul, is to experience this complete freedom.
So these three factors are there: our destiny, our karma, karmic reactions. Then how we use our limited free will, our tiny free will, to choose our actions in goodness, passion, and ignorance. But then above all that, that was the only thing. Then it may seem that it's all like a clock. But there is another factor, which is Krishna's will or divinity. That basically kind of it's kind of over and above all of that, because Krishna is the controller of the three modes of nature, and he is not bound by the laws of nature. So, like for example, if the calf behaves properly, then the owner can come and open the rope, and then the calf can go and play in the field.
But here is the more interesting thing, that even if a person is in, like the psychophysical nature is not to his advantage, his karmic reactions are completely messed up. So he's enduring suffering after suffering. He is not even engaging with goodness or passion. He is in the depths of ignorance, which is like complete, like solitary confinement. But even within that space, if that tiny jiva just calls out in anguish and says, I want to be free, then also this super soul, this friend within the heart, can immediately, make a difference.
We have seen that in the famous story of Gajendra, who was an elephant, a king of the elephants, and he was caught by this alligator or crocodile, and the elephant struggled for hundreds of years. For a long time, and finally he calls out to the Supreme Lord in anguish, and at that point the Supreme Lord appears and frees him from that terrible situation. So the results can be superseded by the Supreme at any point of time, and that's where those two questions, that the mercy and if somebody has limited free will, then how can they? Amritwani asked that question. So those are dependent on the supreme will. And in Bhagavatam it is said, karmana devanetrena jantur dehopapadyate, that by our karma and devanetrena, which means the supervision of the supreme, everything happens. Everything is actually ultimately sanctioned by the Supreme Will. What the results we get and how we'll get it is all sanctioned by the Supreme. It's not happening just by the forces of nature. That's the main point, that is happening under Krishna's supervision as a super soul. We'll discuss more of that in the 13th chapter, where Krishna, the super soul, is described as Upadrashta Anumantacha, that he's the overseer and he's the sanctioner. So everything that we get or do is ultimately sanctioned by the super soul, and if he doesn't sanction it, then we can't do it. So because like this machine is ultimately kind of run, this whole universe and our body is like a machine, and it's run by the super soul. So if he says, okay, no, you can't do it, we can't even lift our finger, we can't even lift our eyelids if he doesn't sanction it. So that's where the supreme or divinity comes into the picture, in terms of what we can do and then what we get from our actions.
So we'll end with this little clip from this movie, The Adjustment Bureau, which actually deals with free will and destiny. And this guy, his whole life has been sort of laid out for him. And this is actually an agency, and there's a chairman of that agency who sort of sits up there and just writes down these plots. And so in this case, he actually by chance figures out that he has a way out of it. And so in the end, there is this really nice dialogue where it's described that the whole purpose of everything is to actually figure out that we do have that choice and we do have that freedom. So
Good time, right?
yeah, totally to the end. Hold on, I need to go more.
Most people live life on the path we set for them, too afraid to explore any other. But once in a while, people like you come along who knock down all the obstacles we put in your way. People who realize free will is a gift you'll never know how to use until you fight for it. I think that's the chairman's real plan. That maybe one day we won't write the plan. You will.
So it's ending with maybe one day we won't write the play, you will. And the whole purpose is to discover that free will.
And that's kind of what Krishna is also telling Arjuna, right? That, you know, he gives him that freedom, and tells him that now you choose. Throughout the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna is speaking, and in the end, as we progress through the Bhagavad-Gita, we'll see how Krishna will finally tell him that now that I have spoken, now it's your choice, right? So we can now.
Yeah, so Anshu's question, what is the difference between fate and mercy? Yes, so Krishna can intervene by his mercy. Our fate can be completely changed, and our future can be completely changed. And that's the whole purpose of the spiritual life, is to wipe out that destiny that we have and rewrite a new destiny for ourselves.
Without mercy, actually, none of us can get out of the cycle of karma, because we actually had a person who used to come to one of our classes and would always say that I would like to go through every single reaction, karmic reaction, and it's not fair that the mercy should be able to wipe it out. But the reality is that without that mercy, you know, it's because every single breath that we take, we are incurring some karmic reaction.
And that kind of karmic reaction is impossible for us to wipe out, right? How will we wipe out so much karmic reaction? It's like an ocean. It's like an ocean, and we are like able to maybe move a drop at a time. So it will take us eternity to wipe out that karma.
Yes, and when the desired result does not show up, don't give up. Yes, express it. Exactly, because actually, I was thinking about that myself, that there is a third factor. Sometimes we do something, and then, our effort is there, and then maybe even the fate or the destiny is there. But there's a third factor there, which is time. And we don't know that what is the fructification. It's like putting a seed in the ground and then going and seeing every day and thinking, oh, the seed is not sprouting. But maybe there's a timeline there.
And Krishna is not bound by the laws of nature. He's not bound by the laws of karma either. So if he desires, then something else may happen. Even two people doing the same thing, but they get different results. And it's Krishna's will. And that is something that was a question that was asked by Arjuna's elder brother Yudhishthir after the battle of Kurukshetra happened and so many people died. and he was really sad and really broken that he was responsible for the death of so many people, and he went into depression. Like before the battle, Arjuna went into depression. After the battle, his elder brother went into depression, and Bhishma, his grandfather, explains to him that this is the will of God. This is
Time.
and Kala, right?
Kala.
Which is ultimately the will of God, and nobody can fully understand the will of God. It's not like a mathematical equation you can understand.
Naji, there can be effort without fruits.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can there be fruit without effort because of fate?
Yeah, people win a lottery or people get something unexpected, right?
Unexpected, yeah. But in general, one should not
depend on
that. That's not the general route. Oh God, careful. Later. Yeah.
How can you see the end result in each choice that you make? You don't want to see the end result. How can you see the end result?
Okay.
You want to take that?
In a minute. How can you see the end result in each choice that you make? Could you explain your question a little bit more? Maybe you can type, what do you mean by end result? Every choice that we make, the end result, it's still not the end, right? It has a lot of ripple effect. So, we may see some immediate result and we may see some intermediate result, but we may never really know how far, those ripples are going to extend, right? So, I don't know, Ashley, Darren, if you have something further on that.
Type along.
Yeah. Expressing those lifetimes and what we bring from them is deterministic, but how we react is our free will agency.
Yes.
Tax returns while in prison.
Yes, that was a reference from Shawshank Redemption. One of my favorite movies.
Okay, let's see. Do tax returns. Can a jiva call for help for another jiva, or is it's individual? Yeah, actually, that's a good point, Tarini. That because we talked about how Krishna never interferes with the free will of any living entity or any jiva, but this is why Krishna is so overcome with gratitude when another individual or another jiva tries to intervene and say, hey, nudge the other person a little bit and say, hey, come on along, you're meant for something much more. Then Krishna becomes completely overwhelmed with gratitude because he says, I can't do that work because I'm bound by this contract of non-interference.
But then somebody is asking me on your behalf and I'm obliged to this person, so I'll follow. I'm just following this guy.
Yeah, it's very nice. Does Krishna only intervene in mercy when we make a free will choice to cry out for help?
Does Krishna only intervene in mercy when we make a free will choice to cry out for help? No, he can intervene in whatever way he wants. I mean, even when we don't cry out for help, he can still feel that, okay, I need to intervene.
The intervention is sometimes even in the form of a voice within the heart. Yeah. So like a thief or some murderer, he is en route, and he's like, I'm just going to do this act today. But everybody has that voice within the heart where Krishna says, don't do that, please, don't do that. So he's always being our friend, right?
He's very alert to our freedom from this material world. And he's never lazy. He's not just a passive observer, but he's very active. Is very active in our freedom from this world.
Thank you, Anshul saying, this is exactly what I needed to hear today. Nothing could calm me down, but after the session felt so good. Well, thank you so much. Sometimes Krishna just makes it happen. And we don't know the timeline. That factor is to be determined. Can my effort generate fruit for other because someone's bad decision?
Can my effort generate fruit for other? Can you explain that?
So if someone else free will, because of someone else's free will, they made a decision, and your effort fruit will be given to others. I mean, how does that work out? I mean, it happens. It happens a lot. But when people take the
transfer your fruit to somebody else.
Sorry.
Do you mean like we can transfer our fruits to somebody else?
Someone is transferring our fruit to somebody else.
Somebody is transferring their fruit to us.
to others, to third person. So
Normally, the fruits of karma, they are not transferable. Everybody has to go through their own. It may seem like that, but it's not like that.
Yeah. If
You
we
can't
have-
take away the fruits of somebody's karma. Neither can you transfer your karma to somebody else.
You can pray for them.
Yeah, you can pray for them, and Krishna can intervene. That's a different factor. But just by the laws of karma, you can't do that.
okay, thank you.
Ashley, oh, there is this question by Amritvani. Is there a collective fate? Let's say 30 people make a building that collapsed as a result of fate. Their effort got wasted. Is it because of collective fate? So collective fate also plays a role, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's what we talked about, the collective karma. Ashley.
It's interesting when we think of this, a story comes to mind. Brahma being told about Krishna and coming to the earth to test Krishna, not being sure if he was the Supreme Lord or not. Krishna showing him all of the other Brahmas from the other universes and him realizing that yes, Krishna is the Supreme Lord and that even Brahma had made the wrong choice, even before all this stating that he is the prime servant. Yes.
Yeah. Said your question, in the McDonald's shooter example, did people get killed because of their karma or the free will of the shooter? What if at that moment the shooter would have chosen not to kill? Those people would have continued to live, so their death, was it really their karma? Great question. Go ahead.
I have to think about that. Well, they were killed untimely, right? Let's put it this way: the people in McDonald's, they were killed in some sense untimely. So if that person chose not to shoot them, maybe their appointment with death would have come in some other form if they were to be killed, because we don't know what their karma was. So given the understanding that we have, they were meant to be killed in that way.
Also, Prabhupada says something very interesting here. He says that, even though we always have a free will, and yet there is some karma also there, but Krishna also knows what we are going to choose.
That's a different question though.
Well, in the sense that, so there is some amount of, so even though there's a freedom, right? Like, for example, we know our child so well. So we know that, yeah, he's, even though there is a freedom, he can make another decision, but we know him so well that we know that given a certain situation, how he's going to respond.
But that question is like, if Krishna knows everything, then is everything predestined?
No, it's not. It's still our choice.
Yeah, so that, your point is answer to that question, that if Krishna, because people say that Krishna knows everything, he knows the future, so does it mean that everything is already predestined? So in this case, yeah, if the shooter had chosen not to shoot, then the outcome would be different. Those people would be saved at that moment, but maybe then they would be killed in some other way if that was their karma. So it's kind of hard to.
And this is why Krishna is saying in that section there that the karma cycle is practically impossible to understand. Right? That how, why those people were there and how does that connect with the shooter? Obviously, they were destined to be killed by that shooter.
And maybe they had something, the shooter and the people who were killed, they had some karma in between them. So why not somebody else? Why that particular person shot them? Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying, that there's something there. And I guess the point I was trying to make was that, yes, there is a free will. The shooter could have chosen this way or that way. But then at the same time, there is some amount of, there is some kind of like knowing, right, that this guy is going to do this. So there is that little aspect there as well. We can think a little bit more. This is one of those, questions that what happens?
Yeah, anytime anything, there's always, when somebody does something to us, it's always, right, the free will of that person doing that thing to us. Whenever there's a crime, right, so somebody is involved, two people are involved, the perpetrator and the victim. So there's always the choice, free will of the perpetrator, and the victim also has some choice, or maybe they don't have their limited choice. So free will is always involved from both the sides. But the fact that a certain result or outcome was achieved, that means that karma fructified at that point. If it didn't fructify at that point, maybe it fructify at some later point. That is the meaning of destined suffering or happiness. If you avoid it in this way, then maybe it will come in some other form. So you can't avoid it ultimately.
Yes, Delia, go ahead.
Thank you. If I could share a reflection and hear your thoughts. Sometimes I've thought that when I am making a decision, while up until the moment that I make that decision, it feels like I have the freedom to make this decision or that decision. But sometimes, like, I feel like once I have made that decision afterwards, it feels like that's the only decision I could have made. You know, like both things are true at the same time. So it kind of feels like Schrodinger's cat, you know, where like the possibility of both exists up until the moment that you choose one possibility, in which case kind of like retroactively, that's the only one that could have existed.
Yeah, that's a good, I think that's kind of what I was saying, that, you know, it's like there is, you know, also in like, as when you were speaking, Delia, I was thinking that it's described that there are 3 phases of thinking. The mind has 3 phases. One is called thinking, the second is feeling, and the third is willing. So when a person actually gets to the point of willing, then you've sort of crossed, you know, the free will is very, very tiny at that point. Right? And so you know that this person is going to do that. He's already, you know, he's already on that path. And so karma has already sort of taken on its sort of like, you know, it's just moments. Yeah, it's fructified. Exactly. It becomes almost like prarabdha, right? So the free will is, so, but very good question, Sid, you know, very good. What about the thought of transferring and how our meditation ripples out to help? We anonymously are promoting good McDonald's, victims of someone's poor choice. What does that mean?
Thought of transferring and how our karma, how our meditation ripples out to help.
Yes.
That was regarding someone's question as to whether or not we can transfer our karma to someone else somewhat. But I think the meditation is we're working to help the collective in a sense. So that's what I meant by that. And then the McDonald's comment came back up. People being at the wrong place at the wrong time, but obviously for some kind of a reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, what we can transfer is that transcendental karma, which is Krishna's intervention, and by meditation, by prayer, we can actually affect the outcome of. And they have done so many experiments.
We actually have a friend, and whenever we would ask him to pray for us, he would always say, "So whatever I have collected so far, I give it to you. Now I'm going to start all over again." So in transcendental mathematics, you know, 1 minus 1 is 2. So he would give everything, and yet he would have everything, you know.
So that kind of transcendental karma, if you can call it that can be transferred. Because you're now asking for Krishna's mercy, and he can intervene.
Ashley, Daryl, I can attest truly that before bad things have happened in my life, there was always a feeling, a slight resistance to my choices that led to a negative outcome. Is that slight resistance or a nudge at my heart and mind to not, is that Krishna? Yeah. That's the meaning of having our friend. Yes, Delia, go ahead.
Okay, so Achyuta Baba tells us that the birth chart depicts your karma, like the karma that you're born into, the karmic field, and that some of that karma can be changed and some of that karma can't. And that really, like, no astrologer can really tell you which can and which cannot. So the way that I've begun to approach this is that, like, if the weather report, the astrological weather report tells you that something's coming, I think what you have to do is react, like try to make the best decisions that you can with the information that you have to maybe avoid a negative circumstance or do something. But so that's like where your free will comes in. You know, like if the chart says there's sickness on the horizon, you don't just go, oh, well, I'm going to get sick. You actually try to eat healthy or do exercise to try to avoid that. And it can get avoided, but then I also feel like if it doesn't, then there's a certain kind of solace that comes with knowing that even though I ate healthy, did exercise, etc., this still happened. So maybe it could not have been avoided. And then you choose your reaction. That's like the space between the quote you showed earlier, the stimulus and the reaction. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and Prabhupada also actually uses an example. He says, if you know it's going to rain, then you can use an umbrella, right? So it's sort of like one tries to do the best one can. And yeah, that's nice, very nice. You have an awareness of possibilities. It has changed my reaction to people, especially when eruptive anger is a possibility. One is ready and it can be much more peaceful. Yeah. Wow. Karma is always a big topic, and as you can see, there are sometimes not that many easy answers.
I know.
All of us struggle with, even Maharaj Yudhishthir was struggling.
Yeah.
Like, why did this happen? So we may know all of this. And here is something we want to end with. Actually, maybe we can discuss this tomorrow, is that we may know all of this karma, but ultimately we have to know how to respond to this karma. And that response is really from a place of gratitude and also dharma, which means that just because someone is going through a karmic cycle, we cannot just be callous and walk away and say, hey, it's just your bad karma, deal with it, So one has to really approach it with compassion. Otherwise, karma can become a very sort of cold.
Or we become part of the new karma cycle that we start with our coldness.
The rain is a good example because rain is always a possibility. If it's 80% chance, you may take your umbrella and it might not even rain. So still better to take the umbrella. Yeah. So thank you. We'll continue tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to talk about